After the divorce, Mom forced Dad into committing the most heinous act ever. My mom met a guy on the internet and left my dad for him. My sisters and I were all teenagers, and being that my mom had never really been around, decided that we all wanted to leave with him. We all had to write a letter stating our wishes, and it was understood that we would stay with him. My mom didn't even seem to care. Additionally, my dad had this retirement account from his old job. He wasn't rich at all and had worked his ass off for everything he'd ever had. When he got hurt on the job, he could have sued, but was promised that in exchange for him not suing, they'd keep him around. Instead, they canned him and he left with about $100K, I think, in a 401k type account that he'd been saving for nearly 30 years. Lastly, my dad had his house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath brick house that was all of about 800 SF. It wasn't much at all, but my dad loved the place. My mom couldn't stand that house and wanted to move for as long as I could remember. That was another contentious subject that led to the divorce. He'd been paying on it forever, and when he left his old job, he took out a small chunk and paid it off. Anyway, their separation is progressing and it's understood we're living with him. She was so in love with this internet guy that she didn't care. He was in school halfway around the country and she was going to move there to be with him. We knew we'd get by just fine. They seemed amicable and it was understood how this would all play out. The day in court finally comes, and instead of what we all assumed, even my dad's lawyer, she goes to the court with all these crazy claims. He was an abusive alcoholic, he beat us and my mom nightly, he was crazy and no one would be safe in his care. My mom got full custody, she got 50% of his house and 50% of his retirement account. My dad was stunned, that judgment would basically bankrupt him. In order for him to keep the house, he'd essentially have to clean out his retirement account and give her everything. The night of their divorce I went over to see him. He was almost catatonic. He just stared off in space the entire time and would mumble whenever I asked him a question. I've never seen anyone like that ever. My birthday was 2 days away and I asked if he wanted to do something for my birthday and he just answered with, "Your mom has full custody. I will ask if she allows me to see you." I asked if I could drive his old truck to school, since I didn't yet have a car, and he just said no, that I needed to call my mom and have her pick me up. So that's what I did. And the next day in school, the day before my birthday, I'm sitting in our lunchroom when I hear, "Hey, isn't that your grandpa?" from a buddy of mine. I look over and see my grandpa and a cop making their way across the lunchroom toward me. They told me to grab my stuff, and in the office I found my sister there as well. We rode home with them, where we were also met by my little sister, and that's where they told us that our dad had killed himself, shortly after I left the previous night. To make matters worse, it all happened so quickly that nothing had been finalized. My mom dropped all her paperwork and legally became a widow and got everything. House, retirement and his insurance policy. She also got Social Security benefits for us, a fact we didn't find out until much later. She basically took all the money and moved across the country with her new man, leaving us to care for ourselves for the most part. And to this day, when asked about raising us, she'll spin this story of a young widow, doing her best to raise 3 kids on her own. Illinois truck driver's wife moves to Florida to exploit its lifetime alimony laws, and returns with children to Illinois after divorce. Ex-husband has income imputed to him on rental units with no income. Forced to acquire $150,000 in debt to family and IRS, and has barely seen his 3 children in 7 years. 16-year marriage. Orange County. 2005. My ex pre-planned a divorce in Florida, from Illinois, knowing of the alimony lottery there. At the first hearing of 45 minutes, I was ordered to pay 70% of pre-tax earnings in temporary alimony and child support without any documentation. The judge gave the wife all control and income over 33 Florida rental units, while allowing her to relocate 1,200 miles away to Illinois with my 3 children. I have only seen them a handful of hours in 7 years. Everything I had built in 50 years was taken away in less than an hour, followed by 4 years of litigation, and I had to pay her fees $40,000. Later I was imputed $1,200 per month income on the 10 non-producing rental units I ended up with. The $960 a month permanent alimony is somewhat tolerable at the moment. However, I face a lifetime of privacy invasion when she wants more. At no risk to her. I'll be ordered to pay her attorney fees. At present, I owe $75,000 to my father and back taxes of $68,000, growing at about $500 a month in penalties and interest. I have paid $40,000 in her attorney fees. I have paid $90,000 on my side. I'm a truck driver. It would be so easy to end this nightmare in a fiery ball of flames on the highway some night. During divorce proceedings, when we didn't live together anymore, my wife filed a frivolous police report saying that I threatened her. In the police report, she wrote my apartment's address as her place of residence. A court immediately issued a restraining order against me, prohibiting me from being in my apartment, that I rented. While the restraining order was active, several months, I had to live in hotels and Airbnbs, which of course is 2 to 3x of normal rent, without having access to my clothes and other stuff. I also was paying the rent for the apartment that was empty all that time. She never actually went there during that restraining order, even though she claimed it as her residence. The restraining order was lifted as the case was dismissed after she never provided any evidence or even testimony to DA. I didn't sign lease extension in time during this process because I had no information how long the restraining order will be for. Even though it was lifted right before my lease expired, I ended up having to move and pay a broker fee. Of course, this also delayed divorce proceedings because we couldn't communicate while the restraining order was active. Besides that, she refused to sign tax form 4, married filing jointly. I ended up filing as married filing separately, which meant quite a few $1,000s extra in payment to IRS. This was the biggest case of "F you over" without any gain for me that I have seen. Not me, but a guy I worked with 10 years ago. I guess it counts as a revenge. I worked with a guy who really stuck it to his ex-wife. When I met him, he was working in a sporting goods store making $8 an hour. He was not really like the other retail monkeys. He was older, well-groomed, well-spoken, clearly educated, etc. One night after work he gets into his car, and I couldn't help but notice that it was a very, very nice newish Jaguar. I asked him how he could afford it and he explained it to me. He had been a senior VP at a well-known Fortune 50 company, which I will not mention the name of. Pulling in $300K with bonuses and stock options. He was married, but the marriage fell apart, and in the divorce, she demanded that she get the house and 40% of his wages. He and his lawyers somehow managed to get her to agree to let him keep the house in exchange for 75% of his pay, no dollar figure or employer specified, LOL. As soon as she took the settlement, he quit his job and looked for a minimum wage job. He said to me that she gets 75% of nearly nothing now. He had other money stashed away, so he didn't even need the job, and he had the house and its equity as well. Also, no kids, so there was no child support. Just alimony. She was furious, of course, and tried to re-sue him but failed at least once, and when she claimed that the settlement was not keeping her in the lifestyle she was accustomed to, he simply told the judge that the divorce was traumatic to him and he could no longer do his old job as a result. At least at that time, she did not manage to get out of the deal. Not sure how it all ended. But I thought it was freaking brilliant, if not crazy level spiteful. He was a good employee too. Good with customers, showed up on time, no BS absenteeism or anything like that. He claimed he loved each payday because it reminded him how little she was getting. I paid for another 6 months after the divorce. It took 14 months from me moving out to the actual divorce. All the while I had been paying rent plus something, and the judge set it up I would keep paying the amount I had paid before. So I paid 20 months from my meager income, while my ex kept searching for a job. Something she claimed she had been doing for years while we were still a couple. Magically she found one once the alimony ended. Was it fair? No. She was quickly able to find something, just needed the right pressure. In hindsight, I probably have been too nice to her, not to force her into a job. She later claimed I had made her a stay-at-home person. Well, yes, when she came home crying every day of the week with bleeding wounds from a child she was caring for, I said that maybe she should quit and look for something else. As a caring husband, I saw this as my duty. I am such an a-hole. Was I lucky? Yes. I heard horror stories of guys paying for years, for judges to take ages to set a divorce date, etc., but I also had a prenup and it saved my ass. All this left me hurt, but I recovered and decided to have the best revenge possible, leave happy. I recently drove by her on some street in my Mercedes, my beautiful and smart new wife at my side. Feels good, man. My divorce settlement was a disproportionate lump sum that I paid to my ex. Basically, she got a big chunk of cash and I got the house and its associated large amount of negative equity. How has it affected my life? It convinced me to never get married again. There's far too much at stake to volunteer yourself to the mercies and whims of some judge somewhere, and far too little upside. It didn't leave me bitter or misogynistic, which is good for me. Was it handled fairly? Who knows? I'm free from her, that's the most important thing. My mom was a real piece of work in this department. My mother is mentally unstable and was very abusive to me as a child. When my father finally moved out and asked for a divorce, I was luckily old enough, 13, to legally decide who I wanted to live with. I, of course, chose my dad, and that enraged my mother. By court order, she was allowed to leave in our 4-bedroom house while me and my dad had to move in with my aunt into a 2-bedroom house. We lived there for 4 years while my mom did everything she could to slow down the divorce proceedings. During this period, my father was court-ordered to pay the mortgage and utilities on the house my mother was living in. She would leave all the lights on and crank the heat with the windows open just to drive the utility bills up. She once left the garden hose on for a week into a drain to even make the water bill outrageous. When it was finally all over and she had taken my dad for as much as she could, she decided to sue him for my college fund. I called her and told her if she went through with it I would never speak to her again. She told me if I wanted it I needed to move in with her before I turned 18 so she could get child support from my dad. I refused. She won the case for the money and my dad had to use most of what was left of the fund to pay for her lawyer's costs. I am in my separation phase right now and it does suck, and it does affect how much money you have, but divorce is expensive because it's worth it. Alimony. In my state, alimony is optional and the woman has to ask for it. There are no guidelines, so it's up to the people and potentially the judge. We came to an agreement using a mediator, no lawyers, that is fair, reasonable and time limited, so I am okay with it. The good news is that after the initial agreement, she can't modify it. I only hope that when we do our actual divorce filing, the judge doesn't decide to modify this. I would spend my time arguing this, as the other items are usually out of your control. Set a time limit for the alimony, 3 to 5 years, and know that if she gets remarried alimony stops. Asset split. This really sucks. Basically we have to split everything 50-50. House, 401k, savings, etc., even though I contributed significantly more to it over the years. I don't like it, but I don't have a choice. Child support. This is where I get screwed. My state has very specific guidelines and it is based on how much I make, and does not take into account her salary. I absolutely want to support my child, but I wish it was more fair. Right now, while we are separated, I am paying for both car payments, the mortgage on the house, plus my own rent, and 70% of all expenses for the kid. Honestly, I make enough money that I can handle it and still leave a good life. I have new golf clubs and some other toys. After we sell our house I can go buy one of my own. But I really feel like I have had to pause my life and I am preparing for a major reset. I will be starting over in a lot of ways. Relationships, new friends, new house, etc. It's a bit scary and exciting at the same time. We often find ourselves falling into ruts and we don't know how to get what we want out of life. I have a chance to rebuild my life exactly the way I want it, and that's not a bad thing. TLDR. Alimony sucks and you can get screwed, stay on top of it. Asset split and child support are usually legislated. Divorce is expensive because it's worth it to have your life back. My father went through the process recently. Amounts of money aren't the real concern. The assets must be split as close to 50-50 as possible. So the effing over generally comes in the form of an equitable distribution of one-of-a-kind things. My father had a precious set of old, inexpensive kitchenware that his late mother gave him before he even married my mother. When the divorce went to mediation and she told the mediator that she wanted those pots and pans, she got them. She got them because she was willing to give up something else of equal monetary value, so, something worth less than $10, and was willing to sit in mediation for hours, racking up thousands in lawyer fees for both sides, until my father consented. Again, an even financial trade, but a sentimental trade of overwhelming disparity. Just as a final, F you. A friend of mine in high school worked at a pizza place. One of the delivery drivers was just ridiculously smart when I talked to him. Later I found out that he used to be a nuclear physicist. His wife was also a nuclear physicist, but left him for her lawyer. He got screwed out of his kids, most of the assets, and had to pay a lot towards alimony/child support. He did the math, and figured out the tips he didn't get taxed on plus his minimum wage delivering pizza was more than keeping his job as a nuclear physicist. Plus he got a little satisfaction not having to pay her as much. The guy was really nice. I always felt bad for him. I had a coworker once where the wife racked up well over $150K in credit card debt right before she divorced him. He worked overtime for literally the rest of his life just to be able to survive. Unfortunately he died from a heart attack, probably due to all the stress that she left him with. Edit. From what I understood, it was a bunch of credit cards that added up to over $150K plus that she didn't tell him about. Also he should have filed for bankruptcy. I said as much to him, but he felt that it was morally wrong to file. I think he should have, but some people are like that, they will not take government assistance or any handouts even if they really need it and should. My two bosses were married and opened a bike shop together. He was the brains and the backbone since he was a former Olympic mechanic, she just sort of balanced the checkbook and worked a couple days a week. Unfortunately, he had no credit and she did, so when they opened everything was in her name. All he wanted in the divorce was the bike shop and was willing to buy her half. She wanted the bike shop too, but didn't want to buy him out for his half. Mind you, her father passed away and she was sitting on like $300K in the bank, and also had the audacity to take out student loans for her daughter to go to college. He lost the bike shop and I think he got a little bit of money for his share. What she didn't expect was that all of the high-paying customers would stop going there. They were all his friends or they only wanted him to work on their bikes. So I don't know why she would have had that notion. So he opened up his own bike shop and all of the regulars have become regulars at the new bike shop. Friend of mine cheated on her husband while he was away at school, military. She unfortunately decided to tell me about it. 2 days later I got this frantic phone call at 5:30 saying that she and her kid needed a place to stay the night because her husband had caught her having an early morning phone conversation with the F-buddy. Within 12 hours she had a court-issued restraining order, claiming that he had beaten her a few times. Except that I was friends with her husband as well. He's the most peacefully non-violent person I've ever met and is actually quite a pushover. So now this guy is being escorted from his house by police. Isn't allowed within 50 feet of the house or her or his own kid. Cops gave him 10 minutes to pack a bag and get out. For the next 3 months, he's living out of this bag, moving from house to house, crashing with friends. Meanwhile, his house that he's not allowed anywhere near, isn't even occupied because his wife and kid are living with her F-buddy. Eventually he gets himself together and starts taking her to court for custody and divorce. Everything slowly starts coming to light. When things start going south for her, she cries rape. The judge calls out her BS but the military doesn't, and they open up a full-blown investigation. The guy is a CID agent. He investigates rapes for a living. But with her accusation, he loses his badge and his gun and gets pulled from every case he was on. Becomes a glorified door greeter. The investigation takes so long that his re-enlistment window closes and he's forced to get out, after 10 years of service. He actually managed to get full custody of his kid and the rape charges were dropped. But all he's ever wanted to be is a cop and now as a civilian, he's having difficulty getting a job because all they see is that he was charged at one point in time. He's had to sell his motorcycle and refinance his truck just to make ends meet. My father was a plastic surgeon. Worked his way up from a janitor at a hospital that didn't graduate high school to getting through med school mid-30s. Married my mom in his 40s, she was 20 years younger. They always had a strained relationship. He was a workaholic and also had a drinking issue. My mother on the other hand was controlling and manipulative. I could see both of their issues at a young age. I always knew they needed to be separated, but it didn't happen until my early 20s, which couldn't have been a worse time. My dad had lost a considerable amount of money after the recession and had also gotten 2 types of cancer, prostate and colon, and almost died and pretty much stopped practicing medicine. My mother decided this was the perfect time to divorce him and in the process take every little thing she could from him, including my younger siblings. He fell into a deep depression and still to this day thinks he loves this woman while she continues to take advantage of him. I managed to help him win back his house in court, but he lost every other bit of cash and property. A real shitstorm. Still dealing with it 3 years later. Edit. Before any backlash about taking sides in the divorce start flooding in. I know it's my mother and I shouldn't take sides, but she did some horrible things to my family. It's taken years to recover from, and while it wasn't all her fault, she was the primary catalyst in the situation and didn't have to be spiteful and take every little thing from a man who gave her everything. I suspect everything would have worked a lot better for me had I not married a person with an extreme personality disorder. Sadly, people don't come with those sort of markings, and she hid her nature pretty carefully before the marriage. I got served on a Friday after 5 p.m. when I came home to a nearly empty house. She cleaned out our joint accounts. I had nothing to hire a lawyer with, even had there been one available on a weekend. If there are free resources for men facing divorce in my area, I could not find them. She took the children, all of their clothes, toys, books, and furniture, excepting a bed for each child. I didn't have any idea where my kids were until the following Tuesday. She left no note. She and her family would not answer the phone. My ex refused to negotiate on anything. Because my kids are young and she was a stay-at-home mom, I got very little consideration on custody issues. No one batted an eyelash when my ex withheld the kids from me, or when she cleaned out our joint accounts. I paid for all of the lawyers involved, directly or indirectly. The way she took the money from our shared accounts made it nearly impossible to recover anything. Pretty soon I was a paycheck with support obligations and bills that kept me with negative cash flow for 6 months. I made too much to file for bankruptcy, but not enough to cover everything. I never had an issue with paying child or spousal support. The way they calculated it wasn't fair, but what can you do? I had lots of issues with getting access to the kids. After the divorce, she ignored most of the items in the final decree. I couldn't call my kids and she kept me in the dark about school, medical, and after-school activities. Had I failed to pay support, an organization would have come after me. When she refused to comply with the divorce decree, I had nothing. To get traction, I would have to go back to court, which I couldn't afford. It was brutal. I don't remember long stretches of the last 2 years. I held myself together, stayed employed, and cared for my kids when I had them. I don't think men in a marriage with a stay-at-home mom understand how vulnerable they are. I would never consider such an arrangement again, under any circumstance.